Talk to me a little bit about this announcement. Why the PTO and what was the kind of unique selling point for SURJ?
Look, we're obviously invested in growing sport participation in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but equally looking at ways in which we can engage more broadly in sports that we believe have got a lot of headroom for growth. Like any investment, you want to invest in sports that have got a lot of headroom in them, and we believe triathlon, particularly as a Olympic sport, has a great opportunity to really connect what we see as the strong foundations of participation in cycling, running and swimming with the professional level of the sport, which we believe PTO are doing better than anyone else.
The total raise is around $40 million. Is that a correct kind of number? And what specifically will that capital be spent on?
Look, I won't go into detail on what the amount of capital raised is. That's probably more something for PTO to engage in. But directionally, it's accurate. And I think for us, we look at both the use of those proceeds in a way in which we see one of the core tenets of the investment is directing into the participation base of the sport and how we connect those that play the sport as a recreational or a fitness opportunity into caring about those elite athletes that ply their trade at the PTO and the T100 on a week-to-week basis.
So where is the next T100 race? I know Saudi is obviously going to be in the running. Jeddah, Riyadh, Al Ula, what do you think?
Yeah, look, naturally the topography and the geography of Saudi Arabia lends itself to triathlon. We've got some beautiful waterways around our coastline, and obviously we have the promenades, the corniches that we can utilize to put on a great spectacle. So certainly there'll be competition amongst the cities in Saudi Arabia for hosting rights into the future. But equally, you've seen the development of the race calendar for T100, and some of the other products that they bring to market are really going to be attractive to some of the most iconic destinations in the world. And we look forward to coupling Saudi Arabia with those amazing cities.
So let's talk about deals and maybe what might be on the horizon. When you think about first the PFL deal and now this PTO deal, what is next? Obviously, I know you probably won't tell me specifically, but what do you have your eyes on? What are you thinking about? What other sports are you looking at?
Yeah, look, we align to the Ministry of Sports national sports strategy. So any of the top 20 sports that they identify as being important to the kingdom, we naturally will try and find ways in which we can invest in those sports to achieve the objectives of our mandate at SURJ. We obviously are an investment company, so return on capital is really important. But equally, the impact that we can have on the domestic sports economy and the social change connected to Vision 2030 is really important when we assess those future investments. Obviously, for us, when we look at the investment types, we're looking at sports that have really strong foundational strengths, like years of heritage, sports that are global in nature, that serve the big economies of the world. That's important from a return on capital perspective. We look at ones that are skewing young. Obviously, the population of the world is becoming younger, and how we serve those different types of consumers is important. We also look at sports that are sort of digitally nascent, ones where we can take the assets that exist in the sport today, potentially transform some of the product apathy that may exist in that sport, and then really drive digital connectivity to build what we sort of talk about as a digital economy around that sport that's really going to enable these sports to take the next step commercially as the economic sort of landscape around sport tends to shift.
Digitally nascent. We'll talk about that in a second. I find that so interesting, and I know that's all part of your strategy there. You mentioned return on investment. How do you evaluate that with these deals? And are you seeing that with something like the PFL?
Yeah, look, I think we're very early stage. We're 2 years into our business cycle. PFL was our first investment. It had two components to that. It was our global Topco investment in the PFL global business, and then with the launch of the PFL MENA business, which was very much around developing a league for the MENA region that allowed domestic growth and regional growth in MMA, and really provide pathways for young aspiring combat sports enthusiasts to have a path to one day potentially ply their trade in Madison Square Garden as part of a global PIF tournament. So when we think about those type of things, we look at what is the evolution of our portfolio, how long will it take to build the portfolio that we want, and then once we have those important assets, how we really drive them to succeed. Like any investor, you want to have a proactive impact on the enterprise value growth of those investments. So, like any investor, we'll have an investment cycle and a commercialization cycle, and as the investments mature, our ability to liquidate those assets and recycle that capital into the next opportunity is broadly part of our strategy. So we're early days. We're patient. We're certainly not an investor that has a time clock ticking against our target companies and our portfolios. We're very much about how we can lean in and help and use the assets of the kingdom more broadly, not just our capital, but a really ambitious bunch of companies that are Saudi companies wanting to grow their profile on the world stage. We have an ambitious tourism authority that wants to drive a lot of tourism outcomes. We have a general entertainment authority that really wants to bring world-class entertainment assets to the kingdom. So this is not just a SURJ or a PIF play. This is certainly a coordinated effort across the kingdom. And yeah, we're in an exciting early stage of that journey and a long way to go.
Let's talk a bit about streaming. The DAZN deal was so interesting, and it really consolidated Saudi Arabia's ambitions to become a streaming giant for sports. But how is that deal kind of shaped up? And we talked about ROI, but again, what have you seen there, and what do you see for the future after that deal?
Yeah, I think if you go back to my point earlier around, what our investment thesis is and how we see the sport economy evolving, the last 30 years, sport has dined out on linear broadcast deals that have underpinned the economics of sport. And as we've seen over the last decade, there's been an acceleration, or I'd say a deceleration really, in how important those funds are to the economics of any sport. There's tier one sports that continue to drive growth in linear and just broadcast rights more generally. But I think moving forward, that's going to be clear that will become a really challenging line item in the P&Ls of sports, and how we help sports make that transition from an analog past to a digital future is going to be, I think, the definition of success and failure in sport over the next decade. And as we took a step back and looked at how do these sports look at ways in which they can distribute their content into a modern day consumer in an effective way, DAZN have carved out a really unique position in being by far the market leader globally in sports streaming. We believe they've got a much broader role to play as they start to expand their product, I suppose, line, and also how they can play more of a role in the day-to-day consumption of sport by those who sit on the DAZN platform. So, whether that be application into our portfolio, but more generally, we're very bullish about what the DAZN business can be for sport, more than just a streaming platform, but very much a digital, or presiding around a digital economy for the sport that they invest in.
Yeah, and how does it work with the kind of competition you see over in Qatar with beIN Sports? How do you think about that when you think about the kind of linear versus digital strategy?
Yeah, I think all linear broadcasters now have a digital strategy as well, and a beIN have that as well. And I think competition for sports rights is good for sport. So I think whilst we have a, I suppose, jump on the rest of the market from a streaming perspective and over 20 million subscribers around the world, we expect that other more traditional broadcasters are going to start to accelerate their transition as well from linear relationships with their customers to direct-to-consumer digital ones. So, that's inevitable. Where we want there to be competitive tension for our sports IP. At the end of the day, if there are other broadcast partners willing to pay premiums for the rights to the sports that we invest in, then that's great. We haven't invested in DAZN to purely serve our own interests. We believe DAZN's business goes well beyond the assets that we will have in the sports economy.
Let's talk football. You're a former footballer. I hear you're an Al Nassr fan. Cristiano Ronaldo, of course, just signing until 2027. But what happens next? Who is your kind of dream player that you hope the club brings in?
I think, look, it's all about sort of transition. When the privatisation process started with SPL, PIF led the way there, and I think you may have seen recently the Ministry of Sport announced another 4 clubs being privatised. So you're going to see that trend continue, and privatisation means professionalism and all the things that I think a league needs at a relatively consistent level across the competition. So as Al Nassr as a club continues to evolve, and Cristiano's had an amazing impact on the league, but also on the club and its profile. But if you look across their roster, it's a world-class roster. Al Hilal showed that in the recent Club World Cup, the FIFA Club World Cup in the United States. Making it through to the knockout stages demonstrated that the quality of the SPL is really there, and it's only going to improve. And I think you'll start to see at least the trend across these clubs that they're starting to invest in high-profile younger talent as well, which I think is really important in the development of the league. So I think it's at a really interesting inflection point. I think the initial high-profile ingestion of players that we've had the last 2 or 3 years has been amazing for the league, and that's really set a foundation that will allow all clubs to go to the next level and be a genuine force in regional and global football.
There's a lot of talk around Saudi Arabia's mega projects being sort of cut down and diminished due to the impact of sort of lower oil prices, a ballooning budget deficit. Are you seeing, obviously not today with a deal of this size, but and even the deals before, are you seeing any impact of that in the sports sector and in what you do?
No, not at all. I think the sports sector is a really important pillar of Vision 2030, and it's not just about visibility. It's really about mobility outcomes and changing the way Saudi Arabians engage in physical activity and sport more generally. So that's always going to be there. How and where and how that is executed over the next couple of years, I think will be interesting to see. And we've got our role to play as SURJ, but like I said earlier, it's not just a PIF or SURJ play; it's a whole of kingdom commitment. The Giga projects, as you touched on, they're building world-class facilities for all types of sports. How we utilize those with interesting globally recognized content down to grassroots community content. That's all part of the strategy for us to align to. So now we see that continuing to be a really key pillar in the progression of the country over the next couple of years.